If you've ever been treated like less than human because you didn't look like you belonged, hit like and subscribe. I was humiliated until I made one call. I hadn't had a real bed in 9 months, but that morning, the booth at Ray's Diner felt like the warmest place on earth. My name's Elijah Boone, and yeah, I'm homeless. Not because I messed up, not because I'm lazy, but because the VA paperwork got lost too many times, and after my wife died of breast cancer, I couldn't afford both her funeral and the rent. I served 2 tours, gave up my knees to IED shockwaves, and now I survive on black coffee refills and dignity. Most mornings, I sit at Ray's because it's the only place that doesn't look at me like I'm stealing oxygen. The waitresses know me. Clara slips me toast. Miguel nods when I walk in. I always sit in booth 7 in the corner. Quiet. Out of the way. But that day, something felt off the moment the door chimed. 2 cops stepped in, one older, stocky, sunglasses still on indoors like some old-school sheriff caricature. The other younger, twitchy, hand already near his belt. They scanned the room and landed on me like they'd found what they were hunting for. "Sir," the older one said, already walking my way, "we got a report of a suspicious individual loitering in this establishment." I blinked. Loitering? I had a mug, a receipt, and 2 crumpled dollars on the table. But it didn't matter. It never does. "Can I see some ID?" he asked, louder now, like he wanted the whole diner to hear. I opened my wallet. It had my VA card, worn down to plastic dust, and a folded photo of my daughter, Mari, and her Army ROTC uniform from Howard. The younger cop sneered. "Doesn't count. We need real ID." I didn't have a license anymore. It expired, and without a permanent address, you can't renew it. That's how the system folds in on you. "Step outside," the older one barked, and before I could ask why, his hand was gripping my arm hard. People were staring, but not saying a word. Not even Miguel. That's when the younger cop muttered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Should have stayed on the street where you belong." That's when the boiling started in my chest. Not fear, rage. Not for me, but for every other vet. Every other black man who'd be humiliated just for daring to sit indoors. I asked, quietly, "Can I make one phone call first?" The older cop laughed. "What, your lawyer?" I said no. "My daughter." He rolled his eyes, but handed me my phone like he was granting a dying wish. I dialed. "Lieutenant Mari Boone," she answered. "Com, clipped? Code 812. "What's going on, Daddy?" I didn't even have to answer. She heard the cop laughing. "Put him on," she said. And the moment I handed that phone to the older officer, the color drained from his face like someone pulled the plug on a faucet. She outranked both of them. Not by a little, by a lot. She was military police, currently on assignment with Jack. The younger cop was still smirking until the older one hissed at him to shut up. That diner went so quiet you could hear the bacon sizzling in the back. Then Mari's voice, loud enough on speaker, said, "You just illegally detained and attempted to remove a decorated veteran with service-connected PTSD from a place of business. Stay where you are. Internal Affairs is en route." The phone call wasn't just a lifeline, it was an earthquake. I sat back down in my booth, sipped my coffee, and watched the 2 cops try to casually exit the diner only to be blocked by the same people who minutes ago had stared at me in silence. Miguel, Clara, even Ray himself. When IA showed up, those 2 officers were marched out like school kids caught stealing. I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. That day, I got both. And a warm breakfast on the house. I didn't think it would go anywhere after that. Usually, things like this disappear into apology emails and administrative leave black holes. But this time something shifted. Maybe it was because the entire thing had been captured on Ray's security footage. Or maybe it was because Mari refused to let it go. They humiliated you, Daddy. Not just you. Every vet they thought wouldn't fight back. She filed an official complaint with the Civilian Oversight Board and tagged it with the Internal Disciplinary Registry for the department. Turns out, those 2 officers, Officer Brandt and Officer Holloway, had a history. At least 6 complaints between them for excessive force, all involving black or brown men, most of them unhoused. But none of those complaints stuck, because they never had someone like Mari documenting everything. She requested footage, filed FOIA requests, even got in touch with a local reporter, Kiara Jennings, who ran a segment on the pattern of abuse unfolding in our district. She interviewed me. I almost said no. I didn't want to be the homeless veteran who cried racism, but Kiara didn't treat me like a prop. She sat beside me in that same booth, camera off, and just listened. I told her about Afghanistan, about losing Simone, about how the system that promised to take care of me acted like I'd already died. I told her about the look on that young cop's face, how it reminded me of the way enemy soldiers looked at us when they thought we were disposable. Her story aired 2 nights later, primetime, local news, right before the weather. The diner was in the background, my voice shaking. Mari's photo on screen in full dress blues. And then came the flood. Calls from other men who'd been roughed up. One guy who said Brant broke his wrist because he looked like he was casing cars. Another who said Holloway followed him 3 blocks from a shelter just to cuff him on a trespass warning that didn't exist. The oversight board reopened every single one of their cases. Meanwhile, I started getting visits from strangers. A woman named Letitia brought me a care package and a card. A teen named Jamal handed me a sketch he made of me in my booth, calling me the Quiet Storm. Local organizers started a GoFundMe to get me into transitional housing. I didn't want to accept it. Felt like pity. But then Clara, the waitress who always slipped me toast, said, "This isn't charity, Elijah. This is a receipt for everything you gave that this country forgot to pay back." So I took the help. Moved into a small studio. Got new boots. Started speaking at town halls. They asked me to be on the advisory board for unhoused veterans. I said yes. Not because I had all the answers, but because now, when someone like me walks into a diner, I want them to be able to sit, drink their coffee, and not brace themselves for the worst. And Brant and Holloway? Turns out that IA had been collecting dust on a whistleblower report for months. Mari's push cracked it wide open. They were both suspended without pay, pending disciplinary hearings. But here's the thing no one saw coming. Ray, the diner owner, he testified. He handed over all security footage. And in court, he said, if this man hadn't spoken up, they'd still be out there hunting the next Elijah. The judge didn't say much. But when he read the verdict, termination for both, he looked me straight in the eye. I don't think he meant to. But in that moment, I felt seen. Not as a case file. Not as a homeless man. Just as a man. A father. A veteran. A human being who finally got to stand up and be counted. Some people think the story ends there, with 2 bad cops getting fired and a news headline that fades into the next cycle. But for me, that was just the middle. The real ending, the one I didn't even know I was fighting for, was peace. Not just mine, but for every man who looked like me and never made it to tell their story. The day after the verdict, I walked into the diner again, not because I needed coffee or warmth, but because I wanted to sit in my booth on my own terms. The one near the window with the chipped Formica table where the light hits just right in the morning. And this time, nobody stared. Nobody shifted nervously or whispered into their phone. Clara brought my order before I even asked. "Your usual, Mr. Elijah," she said with a wink. I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. But then, something even more unexpected happened. A man about my age, dressed in a VA polo, approached my table, hat in hand. "Name's Terrence," he said. "Saw you on the news. You mind if I sit a minute?" I nodded. He'd been in the Navy, injured in Bahrain, lost his job in a factory downstate, and had been sleeping in his car. But he said after seeing what happened with me, how I fought back, how I stood firm, he checked himself into a transitional center the next day. "You reminded me I still got some fight in me," he said. That broke me. Right there in that booth, 2 grown men crying over black coffee and scrambled eggs because for the first time, someone reminded us we were worth saving. And it didn't stop with Terrence. Every week, more came. Some sat. Some just nodded through the window. Mari came by once in uniform, shook hands with every staff member, and kissed my forehead before heading to her next deployment. She said, "You taught me what leadership really looks like, Dad." I don't know how I kept it together. Maybe because in the war, you learn to compartmentalize. But later that night, in the quiet of my little studio, I finally let it wash over me, the grief, the rage, the vindication, the hope. I lit a candle for Simone. I whispered thanks. I wrote in my notebook for the first time since the VA gave it to me. And then I picked up the phone and called the local high school. Told them I wanted to volunteer, talk to the kids about dignity, about service, about what to do when the world tries to erase you. They said yes. Next week, I'll be speaking to the civics class. Ray's closing the diner that morning just to come watch. You know, they tried to make me disappear. Like I was an eyesore they could erase. But they forgot something. I wore a uniform for this country. I carried brothers who didn't make it home. I held the line when no one else would. And now? Now I hold the mic. I speak. I stand. I remember. And I remind every young man and woman who feels invisible that they are not alone. They never were. And sometimes, One phone call really can end a career built on fear and start a legacy built on truth.